Donald Trump, he is taking the stand in his family's New York civil fraud trial today.
Trump is the first U.S. president to testify as a defendant in a court trial in more than 100 years. The former president is accused of inflating his wealth and property values to get favorable loan and insurance terms. The judge in this case already found Trump and others liable for fraud earlier this year. This trial centers on other allegations, including falsifications of business records, conspiracy, and insurance fraud.
Before entering the courtroom, in the pictures you were just seeing, Mr. Trump denied wrongdoing and took the opportunity to attack the New York Attorney General. She had a response ready even before he opened his mouth.
It's a terrible, terrible thing. These are political operatives that I'm going to be dealing with right now. You have a racist Attorney General who made some terrible statements, and we just see some more that came over the wires today. It's a very sad situation for our country.
At the end of the day, the only thing that matters are the facts and the numbers. And numbers, my friends, don't lie.
All right, folks, the Jack Mockler Show is live. In the Pentagon's most secure room, every four-star general and admiral, along with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the heads of all military branches, sat with the president, a moment meant to reinforce unity and the chain of command. What happened next would test that relationship in unprecedented ways. Instead, what happened in that room will go down as one of the most unprecedented, shocking, and destabilizing moments in modern American military history. Because when that meeting ended, the President of the United States stormed out in rage. Not because of policy disagreements, not because of budget disputes, not because of strategic differences over military operations, but because every single military leader in that room, every single general and admiral.
CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins us now from outside the courthouse in New York City. Bob, a historic moment. Can you walk us through Trump's testimony so far?
It's good to be with both of you. I was inside the courthouse today watching this testimony unfold, and it's clear that former President Trump is very defensive about the valuations of his properties over the years. In fact, he testified under oath repeatedly today that he believes properties like 40 Wall Street here in New York, or Doral, his golf course in Florida, or Mar-a-Lago, his estate in Palm Beach, that these are properties that are undervalued, in his view, by his own accountants and his financial statements. The judge in this case, Judge Engoron, however, was visibly frustrated with Trump repeatedly during the course of his testimony, urging Trump's lawyers to get their client, to get the witness in line, to say yes or no to yes or no questions. And at one point, Judge Engoron warned Trump's legal team that if Trump did not change his conduct in the courtroom in terms of how he answered questions, he would have, quote, negative inferences when it came to the scope of the penalty in this ongoing civil case.
Looked him directly in the eyes and told him that his behavior is a disgrace to the uniform, a disgrace to the Constitution, and a disgrace to everything the American military stands for, and Trump simply could not handle it. Let me set the scene for you. The meeting was convened at Trump's request. He called it, probably expecting to assert his authority, probably expecting to intimidate the military leadership into submission. He had just fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General C.Q. Brown. He had purged multiple other senior military officers. He had installed a retired general, Dan Kane, who he believed would be more loyal to him personally, and now he wanted to bring the entire military leadership together to make sure they understood who was in charge. But the military leaders had other plans.
Well, Bob, he might have negative inferences in that courtroom, speaking as a judge, but talking to voters and polling voters, they seem to be inferring other things about the former president, and a lot of them like what they see. In fact, according to a new CBS News poll, former President Trump is leading President Biden in the 2024 presidential race if it were to happen today. So the question then becomes, what impact, if at all, will this trial have on those numbers? By the looks of it, it's only helping the former president.
Well, it could be helping in the sense of consolidating Trump supporters around him, especially if they were having the potential to flirt with other candidates politically in this Republican presidential primary race. At the same time, as you know so well, It's very early in the presidential race. We're a year out. It was a year out on Sunday. Polls can only tell you so much. They're indicative a bit of sometimes where the public sentiment is on certain issues. But at the same time, Trump is facing not just this ongoing civil case, but 4 other cases that loom over his own.
They had had enough. They had reached their breaking point, and they decided together that they were going to speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences. The tension in that room must have been absolutely electric. The military leaders had been watching Trump's behavior for months. They had seen him threaten Iran with reckless abandon. They had heard his rhetoric about civilization-ending wars. They had watched him fire officers who disagreed with him. They had witnessed him treat the military as a personal tool rather than a constitutional institution. And they had finally decided that silence was no longer an option.
Revival campaign running for the presidency again, a case in Georgia, a criminal case on his handling of classified records, and another one on the federal level with the special counsel investigating January 6th. And then there's one, Tony, just down the street here in New York investigating those hush money payments to Stormy Daniels.
You know, Bob, those numbers, the polling numbers that Tony was just going over reflect what would happen were the election to take place right now and if former President Donald Trump were the candidate against President Joe Biden. But are any of the cases that you just mentioned potentially disqualifying for the former president?
That's a great point. There is some hesitation in the Republican ranks about what this would all mean for the Republican Party to have a convicted nominee, to have someone who had actually been convicted by a judge or jury. At this point, it's very possible. This is different than a criminal case because it's a judge is making a decision here on a civil level. Trump will certainly appeal the decision whenever it comes down in the coming months.
So when Trump sat down and tried to assert his authority, they pushed back. Every single one of them. They told him directly that his behavior was unacceptable. They told him that his threats against Iran were reckless and dangerous. They told him that his disregard for international law was alarming. They told him that his politicization of the military was destroying the institution. And they told him that he was a disgrace to the uniform that he had never worn, a disgrace to the Constitution that he had sworn to defend, and a disgrace to everything the American military stands for. One by one, they said the same thing, and Trump had to sit there and listen to it. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? Trump, who surrounds himself with yes men.
Well, we're at a fluid moment in the presidential cycle. Democrats over the weekend, as these new polling numbers emerged, started to have some more public debate about President Biden's standing, about whether he should be the nominee. And Republicans continue to have some consternation, at least in some quarters, about Trump's ability to win.
Robert Costa flashing some of the insight you can expect during the whole 2024 campaign and flashing some of that swag that CBS is putting out for. I see that jacket. First cold day. America Decides. Campaign 2024.
Right. We're already putting in our requests. Where is mine?
Looking good. Robert Costa, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Mike.
Well, John C. Coffey joins us now. He's a professor at Columbia Law School who specializes in white-collar crime. He's also the director of Columbia University's Center on Corporate Governance. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We know that the former president clashed with the judge while testifying today, as we just heard from Robert Costa. How important is the testimony to the ultimate outcome of this case?
Well, look at it this way. It's less important what Donald Trump says than how he says it. If he angers the judge,
who demands absolute loyalty, who cannot tolerate even the slightest criticism, was being told by the most respected military leaders in the country that he is a failure. Not just a policy failure, not just a political failure, a personal failure, a disgrace. The word must have hit him like a physical blow. And his response was predictable. He stood up. He walked out. He stormed out of the room like a child who just lost a game. He could not handle it. He could not accept the truth. So he just left. Now, let me tell you why this meeting happened in the first place. Because this did not occur in a vacuum. This was the result of months of escalating tension between Trump and the military leadership. It started with Trump's decision to fire General C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Brown was the highest-ranking military officer in the country. He was a respected leader. He was a decorated combat veteran. He had served his country with distinction for decades, and Trump fired him without warning, without justification, without any legitimate reason. The real reason Trump fired Brown was because Brown was too focused on diversity and inclusion initiatives. Trump wanted the military to focus exclusively on fighting and winning wars. He did not want generals worrying about diversity. He did not want them worrying about inclusion. He wanted them to be warriors, not social engineers. And when Brown refused to abandon his commitment to those principles, Trump decided he had to go. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, a Fox News veteran who had long criticized the military's focus on diversity, was fully on board with this decision. He had been calling for Brown to be fired publicly and privately, and Trump was happy to oblige. But firing Brown was just the beginning. Trump also fired multiple other top generals and admirals at the same time. It was a purge. He was cleaning house. He was getting rid of anyone he thought was disloyal to him personally, anyone who might question his authority, anyone who might refuse to follow his orders without hesitation. He wanted to surround himself with people who would say yes to everything he wanted, people who would not push back, people who would not tell him the truth when he was wrong. And then Trump appointed Dan Kane to replace Brown. Kane was a retired general who Trump believed would be more loyal to him personally. Kane had been out of the military for years. He had been working in the private sector, but Trump brought him back and put him in the highest military position in the country. And Trump genuinely thought Kane would be his man. He thought Kane would follow his orders without question. He thought Kane would support his aggressive stance against Iran. He thought Kane would be a loyal soldier in every sense of the word. But apparently, that is not what happened, because the other military leaders, the ones who had not been fired, the ones still in charge of their respective branches, they were not happy about any of this. They were not okay with Brown being fired. They were not okay with Trump's purge. They were not okay with his threats against Iran. And they were not okay with the message that Trump was sending to everyone. If you do not agree with me completely, you will be fired. So they decided they had to speak up. And when Trump called the meeting to try to manage the situation, they all decided together that they were going to tell him exactly how they felt. The meeting was a disaster from the very beginning. Trump walked in expecting deference and got resistance. He expected compliance and got defiance. He expected support and got condemnation. Every single general and admiral in the room told him the same thing. His behavior was a disgrace. His threats were reckless. His leadership was unacceptable. And Trump could not take it. He could not sit there and listen to people he thought he had authority over tell him that he was wrong. So he got up and walked out. This is a constitutional crisis waiting to happen, because the military is not supposed to be in conflict with the commander-in-chief. The military is supposed to follow orders. The military is supposed to respect the chain of command. The military is supposed to support the mission no matter what. But when the commander-in-chief acts in ways that violate the Constitution, when he threatens war without cause, when he treats the military as a personal tool, the military has a duty to speak up. And that is exactly what happened in that meeting. Let me dig deeper into why the military leaders felt compelled to speak up, because this was not an easy decision for them. These are professionals. They spent their entire careers following orders. They spent their entire careers respecting the chain of command. They spent their entire careers staying out of politics. But Trump pushed them so far that they felt they had no choice. They had to tell him the truth. They had to tell him that his behavior was unacceptable, and they had to do it together. The issue that really pushed them over the edge was Trump's rhetoric about Iran. Trump had been making increasingly aggressive statements about Iran. He was talking about war. He was talking about civilization-ending conflicts. He was making threats that sounded like he was actually considering military action. Not just a small strike, not just a limited engagement, full-scale war with Iran. A war that would kill thousands of American soldiers. A war that would destabilize the entire Middle East. A war that could escalate into something much bigger. The military leaders were terrified by this. They knew what war with Iran would mean. They knew the cost in American lives. They knew the cost in treasure. They knew the cost in regional stability. And they knew that Trump did not understand any of it. Trump had never served in the military. Trump had never been in combat. Trump had never seen what war really does to people. He treated it like a game. He treated it like something he could start and stop at will. And the military leaders knew that was not how war worked, so they started pushing back. General Kane, the new chairman, was particularly vocal. He was in briefings with Congress, he was talking to senators and representatives, and he was basically saying, look, we need to be careful here. We need to consider the real consequences of war. We need to think about international law. We need to consider the fact that some of what Trump is talking about could be considered war crimes. And Trump did not want to hear any of it. Trump wanted military leaders who would support his aggressive stance. He wanted them to back up his threats. He wanted them to make his vision of military power a reality. But they would not do it. They could not do it. Their oaths were to the Constitution, not to Trump personally. And the Constitution says that war must be authorized by Congress. It says that international law must be respected. It says that the military has limits, and Trump was ignoring all of that. This is the real core of the conflict. Trump believes that presidential power is absolute. He believes he can do whatever he wants as commander-in-chief. He believes he can order the military to do anything. He believes he can start wars whenever he feels like it. He believes he can ignore international law completely. But the military believes that power has limits. They believe that the Constitution has limits. They believe that international law has limits. And they believe that they have a duty to refuse illegal orders. That is the fundamental disagreement that led to this confrontation. Think about what the military leaders were risking by speaking up. They were risking their careers. They were risking their pensions. They were risking everything they had worked for their entire lives. And they did it anyway, because they believed that the Constitution was more important than their personal careers. They believed that their oaths meant something. They believed that they had a duty to protect the country from a reckless commander-in-chief. That is how bad things had gotten. That is how much they had lost confidence in Trump. The meeting where all of this came to a head was probably not something that was officially planned. The military leaders probably did not coordinate their response in advance, but they all came to the same conclusion independently. They all felt the same way about Trump, and they all decided that they had to speak up. So when Trump walked into that room, he was met with a wall of opposition. Every single one of them told him the same thing. His behavior was a disgrace. His behavior was unacceptable. His behavior was dangerous, and Trump could not handle it. He could not sit there and listen to people he thought he had power over tell him that he was wrong. He could not accept criticism from the military, so he got up and left. He stormed out of his own meeting. He abandoned the situation. He basically said, "I do not want to hear this," and walked away from the room. This is not how a commander-in-chief is supposed to act. A real commander-in-chief would listen carefully. He would consider the advice seriously. He would respect the expertise of his military leaders. But Trump is not a real commander-in-chief in the traditional sense. Trump is a businessman who fires people who disagree with him. Trump surrounds himself with yes men. And when he encountered actual military professionals who would not be yes men, he just left. The implications of this are staggering. The military has essentially lost respect for the commander-in-chief completely. Every single general and admiral in leadership told him directly that he is a disgrace. That is unprecedented. That has never happened in modern American history. The military is supposed to support the president. They are supposed to follow the chain of command. They are supposed to execute orders. But when every single military leader tells the president he is a disgrace, something fundamental has broken down. The military no longer trusts Trump. They no longer respect him. They no longer believe he is fit to be commander-in-chief. And Trump knows this. That is why he got so angry. That is why he stormed out. He could not handle the truth. Now let me talk about the specific personnel decisions that led to this. Trump fired General C.Q. Brown because he was too focused on diversity and inclusion. Brown was a respected leader. He was a decorated combat veteran. He had served his country with distinction. But Trump did not care about any of that. Trump only cared about loyalty to him personally. And when Brown refused to abandon his commitment to diversity and inclusion, Trump fired him. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was fully on board with this decision. Hegseth had been calling for Brown to be fired for months. He said the military was too focused on diversity initiatives. He said it needed to focus on fighting and winning, and Trump agreed completely. So Brown got fired, and Hegseth put his guy in instead. But that decision backfired spectacularly. The other military leaders, the ones still in charge of different branches, they were not okay with what Trump had done. They were not okay with him firing the top officer. They were not okay with his threats against Iran. They were not okay with any of it. So when Trump called the meeting to try to manage the situation, they all decided together that they were going to tell him exactly how they felt. Every single one of them said the same thing. Your behavior is a disgrace. Your behavior is unacceptable. Your behavior is dangerous. Your behavior violates the Constitution. And Trump sat there and had to listen to every single general and admiral in the room basically tell him he is a failure. That must have been devastating for Trump. He does not like criticism. He does not accept it well. And he definitely does not like being criticized by people he is supposed to have authority over. So he did what he always does. He got up and walked out. Let me bring this all together and explain why this matters so much for America. This is not just political drama. This is not just a clash of personalities. This is a constitutional crisis happening in real time. This is the moment where the military essentially said, "We do not accept your leadership anymore. We do not respect you as commander-in-chief. We think you are a disgrace to the office." And Trump could not handle hearing that. He could not accept that truth. The first thing we need to understand is that the military has rules. They have the Uniform Code of Military Justice. They have laws of war that all countries follow. They have international treaties and obligations that bind them. And Trump apparently wants to ignore all of that completely. He wants the military to do whatever he says, regardless of whether it is legal or constitutional. He wants them to commit war crimes if he orders them to. And the military is basically saying, "We will not do that. We will not violate our oaths. We will not commit war crimes just because you order us to do it." This is the real issue at the core. This is what the entire meeting was really about. It was about a basic disagreement between Trump and the military about the limits of presidential power. Trump thinks he can do whatever he wants as president. The military thinks that power has limits. The military thinks that the Constitution has limits that cannot be exceeded. And Trump does not accept those limits. The second thing we need to understand is that this shows the danger of Trump's personnel decisions. Trump fired Brown because he disagreed with his views on diversity and inclusion. Trump put in Kaine because he thought Kaine would be loyal to him personally. But loyalty to the Constitution is supposed to come before loyalty to the president. That is the oath that military officers take. And when Trump does not understand that basic principle, he creates a crisis. Trump wants yes men. He wants people who will follow his orders without question. He does not want experienced military leaders who will tell him the truth. And when he does not get what he wants, he throws a tantrum. He gets angry. He walks away. That is not how leadership works. That is not how the military works. That is not how democracy works. The third thing we need to understand is that this shows there are people in America who will stand up to Trump no matter what consequences they face. The military is not going to be a tool of authoritarianism. The military is not going to help Trump seize total power. The military is not going to ignore the Constitution and international law just because Trump orders them to. That is good. That is a check on power. That is democracy actually working. But it is also dangerous because it means the military and the commander-in-chief are now in direct conflict with each other. The fourth thing we need to understand is that Trump is probably going to escalate this conflict. He is going to attack the military leaders. He is going to say they are disloyal. He is going to call them traitors. He is going to try to fire more of them. He is going to double down on his approach. Trump does not back down. Trump does not accept criticism. And when people stand up to him, he attacks harder. But the military is probably not going to back down either, because they have their oaths. They have their honor. They have their professional standards. And they are not going to abandon those principles just because Trump is angry. So we are looking at a direct confrontation between the president and the military. That has never happened in modern American history. That is dangerous. That could lead to a real constitutional crisis if things keep escalating. The consequences of all this are profound. Civil-military relations in America are now broken. The military no longer respects the commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief no longer respects the military. They are in open conflict. That is dangerous for military readiness. That is dangerous for national security. That is dangerous for everything. Trump's threats against Iran are now basically powerless because the military will not support them. He cannot actually start a war with Iran if the military will not back him up. That might be good. That might prevent a catastrophic war. But it also shows that presidential authority has been severely undermined. The situation will probably get worse before it gets better. Trump is going to escalate. The military is going to hold firm. And eventually, something is going to break. Either Trump backs down and accepts the limits placed on him, or the military has to make a choice about following orders they believe are unconstitutional. This shows how fragile American democracy actually is. We assume that the military will respect the Constitution. We assume that checks and balances will work. We assume that when the president goes too far, somebody will stop him. But we never really tested that assumption until now. And now we are testing it. And we are seeing cracks in the system. The bottom line is this. Trump stormed out of a meeting with the Joint Chiefs because they all told him he is a disgrace. That is unprecedented. That is serious. That is a sign that America is headed toward a real constitutional crisis. The military has drawn a line. They are saying, we will not follow illegal orders. We will not violate the Constitution. We will not help you seize absolute power. And Trump does not know how to respond to that, so he walked out. A confrontation between Trump and the military's top leadership is coming. The question is when and how. The military has spoken. Trump has walked away. The outcome will determine nothing less than the future of American democracy.